down
it's interesting because I've
a few
interviewed
thousand hours.
Yeah, I've interviewed Andrew Tate a number of times, and he has a huge following. There's no doubt about it. I get so many young men, teenage boys and so on coming up to me, what's Andrew Tate like? What do you think of him? They ask me. And it's a complicated question because a lot of what Tate says, I kind of find myself nodding. I've got 3 sons in their 20s, one's 30 now. I've been through their upbringing. And there's no doubt a lot of young men these days feel a bit lost and they're crying out for people to try.
All right, so Eric says the truth is somewhere between the red pill and the black pill. Well, the problem that I have with the black pill, and John, I believe if he's still on here, would probably echo this, is that the black pill fundamentally says there's nothing you can do. Because if you're not born incredibly good looking, then it's over. So you may as well just give up. And they therefore reject anybody who offers any kind of self-development advice. And they would reject anything that I say, but they would also reject anything that Chris Williamson says, because they would look at Chris Williamson and say, well, you're a good looking dude. It's easy for you to say you're just going to attract women naturally anyway. Whereas, you know, I am whatever, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of these so-called, you know, black pill people, they don't actually show their photos. So it's very hard to determine how physically unattractive or not they are in reality, but they claim that their looks are of a status which is so low that no woman's going to look at them, okay? And so therefore, anything, even like going to the gym, doesn't make any difference. You're just an ugly dude with a good body. Making money, well, she's just going to use you for your money and discard you. Gaining status, again, she might mess with you for a while, but she's going to fuck the pool boy. So it's a very, very bleak message. And that's a message that I can't endorse because, for one thing, I think it's incredibly bad life advice in general, right? Because, you know, we're all here. It's what, a 1 in 400 trillion chance that I'm here, that you're here, that Chris is here, that Piers Morgan is here, right? So while we're here, we might as well try and max things out as best as we can. So there's that side of things. And secondly, fundamentally, I do think that these other things do come into play. I don't believe that male attractiveness is solely predicated on how you look. I do think, because we have clients, okay, who are very good looking, and they're not getting any action, right? It's crickets, okay? So if it was just about looks, those guys would be getting laid like rock stars, but they're not. So there's clearly something more to it. And this is what we try to teach in our course, The Edge, the course that I'm doing with James Tusk. If you want more information on that, you can email me, troy@realtroyfrancis.com. But basically, there has to be this X factor. There has to be something else. And the same thing, by the way, is true of money as well. Because although I said money and status plays into it, and they do, there are also plenty of dorky, boring, rich guys out there as well who are not getting any action. Or if they are getting action, they're not retaining those women because the women in the end think this guy's a bit of a boring fucker, and then it all falls apart, okay? So you kind of need to have everything, but I think it's overly simplistic and, frankly, a little bit naive just to put it down to one individual thing. I mean, look at Piers Morgan's wife. If they're still married, I believe they're still together, is a very good-looking woman, right? Would you say Piers Morgan is the best-looking bloke on the planet? No. Now, he's got other attributes, though, you know. He has status, he is articulate, he's probably got, you know, decent money, whatever, right? So I think male attractiveness is much more holistic than we assume, okay? And we're lucky in that regard. We're very lucky in that regard, because the unfortunate thing for women is, sadly for them, it kind of is really all based around looks and body shape for the most part, okay? Not saying other things don't come into play at all, because they do, but for the most part, you know, men do tend to be very visual. With women, they are taking these other things into account, which is kind of good, because it does mean you can level up. And the problem with the black pill is that their message is the antithesis of that. They're like, no, you can't level up, just give up, just go and sit in your bedroom.
Try and guide them, and in his, you know, pretty blunt way, Tate does that to a degree, but he also does other stuff which I'd imagine, like me, you would find very uncomfortable.
Leading question. Eric says, if you do all your dating relationships off of I think Tinder and Instagram, the black pill is most relevant. Well, that's true. And actually, we're going off on a bit of a tangent with this black pill stuff here, but we might as well, because I wanted to use this video more as a way to start the discussion rather than, you know, just the thing in itself. Yes, and what you will notice is that a lot of the data that these people will bring to bear on their arguments is from the dating apps. So they will say, well, look at what happens on the dating apps. Look at how women select on the dating apps. Look at how many men they reject. Look at how many men they swipe past. They'll only swipe on the top 5% of men, and all of that. Now, all of that may well be true. However, what you notice if you go and meet people in real life is there is a marked difference to how you are perceived when you approach a woman in real life than to how you might be perceived by her on the dating app. So, for example, my girl, I was talking to her last week, and she was saying, look, I mean, she said, on paper, you are not my type, okay? On paper, you are not my type. There are other things that I, prefer, okay? Had I met her or attempted to meet her via a dating app, it's very likely she wouldn't have swiped on me. It's very likely we wouldn't have matched. Now, instead, because we met in real life, she was able to sort of see some of my personality, a bit of the riz, a bit of the, the cheeky chappy London geezer, whatever it was she liked about me. That changed the dynamic. And then she found out that there were even more things about me she didn't like my job and all kinds of crap, okay? But because of the chemistry between us, because of the way we were able to build the relationship, those things were kind of, I'm not saying she ignored them, but those things became less onerous to her because she also recognized that I had these other qualities that she did find very attractive. So again, it's kind of like male attractiveness is this spectrum of different things, and women will compromise on certain elements in favor of other elements, okay? Now, you could say, okay, yeah, but she's going to cheat on you inevitably anyway, one day, blah, blah, blah. Well, maybe not. You've got to find a good woman. But the reality is, nevertheless, it's not all just predicated on this one individual factor.
What do you feel about him generally?
He's a complex character. I had him on the podcast about 3.5 years ago, and I didn't actually release the episode. So I have 2 hours of unreleased Andrew Tate footage. We were in the midst of COVID. It was mostly a conversation about COVID and lockdowns and crackdowns and stuff like that. And it was that time when my channel would have just been nuked for the sake of trying to get one conversation out. So at the time, I didn't do it. And then a lot of people have said, why didn't you release it when he was at the peak of his fame? Obviously, that could have got an awful lot of plays. And to be honest, I didn't do it because I thought it would be a pretty poor move on Andrew, although not like I have some obligation to do whatever. But if someone makes a ton of comments during a rapidly moving, chaotic situation, and also they're a bit gregarious, 3 years later, releasing that out into the world kind of stitches him up a bit, and I didn't want to do that. So yeah, we've got 2 hours of unreleased Andrew Tate footage. But he's a complicated guy.
That seems pretty decent, doesn't it? That seems like I mean, if he's genuine, he sounds genuine saying that. That seems to imply that he's a pretty good guy, right? I mean, he could have just released that footage. He could have sent that stuff out. Incidentally, I've got an Andrew Tate interview from around the same time at the beginning of the lockdowns. I don't know if it's still up on my channel or not. My other channel, I can't remember. But yeah, I mean, I quite like the way Chris said that. That was, I think, a principled answer.
Is he a force for good? Is he a force for good with young men or not?
Mixed bag. Net, I don't know. He's certainly brought an awful lot of attention to the plight of young men, and he's tried to simplify down a world which teaches young men that they are defective women. Most of the advice that we hear for young men at the moment is, if you were just less like men, if you just behaved a little bit more like women, if you talked about your feelings a little bit more, if you communicate, if you were more gentle, if you were less concerned with mastery and competition and conquer and becoming better and stuff like that, some of the typical masculine traits, your life would be better. Many men feel like their issues are being dismissed as whining from a patriarchy that they no longer feel a part of.
Yeah, I mean, the Barbie move.
So that's interesting, because yes, this idea of patriarchy gets talked about a lot, right? The patriarchy, the plight of modern women, how the patriarchy still exists, the gender pay gap divide, the way that women are discriminated against in the workplace, the way that women are perhaps treated in the dating sphere or in social spaces. Okay, all this stuff gets talked about a lot. But there are many men out there who feel powerless, right? They don't feel like they are part of this extremely powerful, homogenous group, the patriarchy, who are these guys who are just in control. In fact, many men feel absolutely the opposite. They feel powerless, all right? And we've seen the statistics about how, for example, male virginity has tripled in the last couple of decades or whatever it is, okay? Many men are just giving up on dating altogether. They don't feel any sense of power as far as women are concerned. In fact, if anything, they feel it's the other way around. They feel the power is on the women's side. And that's also the case increasingly in the workplace, where often women will run the HR department and will have decisions over like the hiring and the firing and so on and so forth. Obviously, we have positive discrimination and so on and so forth. So it's a strange dichotomy whereby on the one hand, men are being accused of this toxicity and being accused of, well, you guys are in this predominant situation and therefore, you know, you're bad and it's toxic and everything. But actually, increasingly, guys are feeling like they have very diminishing power in society. And I think that's a very telling point that he makes here.
The blockbuster of the year mentioned patriarchy, I think, a dozen times. And by
Barbie was a terrible film. I don't know, man. I went to see Barbie with a female friend towards the end of the summer, after all the hype had sort of died down. And I only really went to see it because people were talking about it in the space. I've been on Access Vegas, and the first thing Mike Sartain says, right, we're going to talk about Barbie. And I'm like, oh, shit, I haven't even seen the damn thing. So, you know, I was like, well, what am I going to say for the first 20 minutes of this podcast? It was obviously something that got talked about a lot. I felt like I should see it. I watched it. I don't know, man. For me, it was very meh, you know? I thought there were some funny bits. I just wasn't really feeling it. I mean, obviously it wasn't entirely aimed at me. I thought they sort of muddied the waters a little bit as well, because on the one hand, you could say, well, it was this very sort of feminist film that highlighted the plight of women because women are expected to conform to these stereotypes and et cetera, and that's the whole Barbie thing. But then on the other hand, they were sort of covering their bases by saying the same thing about Ken and saying, yeah, but men are also forced to conform to these masculine standards as well, and is that a problem? So I came out of it thinking, well, so basically you're saying both genders have it rough. So life's tough, right? So where does that really get us? I didn't kind of see the overall point of it, if that makes sense.
About the third, I'd had enough of it. You know, I don't even know what
that's a company obviously that has way more than on average female execs at the top, which I'm sure you know about.
Yeah.
A leader.
All right, so JBB, who's a supporter of the channel, so thanks for tuning in. He says, this fool is straight up lying. I assume you mean Chris. I assume you don't mean me. Maybe you do mean me. If so, thank you very much. But when you say that, what do you mean? Why? And you're putting about the way his eyes are looking and stuff like that. But what do you think he's lying about specifically? I mean, I know people have differing opinions on Chris. Some people feel that he, I don't know how to put it, panders maybe a little bit. So let me know if you guys have got any further thoughts on this or your opinions on Chris. Let me know in the chat. I'll be interested to hear them.
The director, the production crew, all of this stuff. I didn't see much patriarchy sitting behind the scenes of that movie.
Well, it never works. It never works.
So the thing with the patriarchy as well, I had this conversation with Pixie. You know, you guys will know Pixie. You know, she's a feminist. She's a progressive girl. She often appears on these podcasts. She's on Fresh and Fit and whatever, and Valuetainment and all this stuff. And I know I'm friends with her from Miami, and her friend Erin as well, Straighterate. And you know, I've asked her a couple of times and said, well, you know, what is it now? Like, what is this manifestation of the patriarchy that we still need to, or you guys still need to, you know, overcome? You need to fight. Like, what is left that needs to be eradicated as far as you guys are concerned? And I don't want to misquote her here, or maybe we'll get her on at some point and we can have the conversation directly. But I've never heard her really give. I mean, there are certain things they'll talk about the gender pay gap. Again, but I mean, that seems to have been debunked somewhat. I mean, if you watch the Jordan Peterson interview, she'll talk about it. It's these very nuanced sort of small things. But I mean, it seems to me, and look, I'm not living in a vacuum here. Obviously, I have female friends. I have a girlfriend. I have female members of the family and everything like that. And living in the West, living in London, in the UK, spending time in America, I just don't see... Again, this is like, you know, male privilege or whatever. But I don't see this hugely oppressive system operating that's really denigrating and pushing women down. Do you know what I mean? Like, if anything, it seems to be kind of the opposite, and they get more into this as we go on.
It's the other way. You know, if you have an all-female cast, a female director, female studio boss, you know, and it's based on a story that promotes women at the expense of men, that's fine. You know, the only narrative that needs to be dealt with is if women are not at least equal in every regard, or are not portrayed as glowing heroines, and then all hell breaks loose.
The problem that you have is most portrayals of women in modern cinema show them as flawless. They don't need to overcome anything at all in order to be successful. They're born perfectly natural. Perfect example of this from The Critical Drinker, the 2 Mulan movies. You'll remember the first one, the animated one, and then they did a live action. In the first one, the protagonist is smaller and weaker and needs to use her cunning and her nous and work incredibly hard to be as good as the guys that are around her. It's a inspiring story of someone who doesn't have everything immediately, working sufficiently cleverly and sufficiently hard and consistently to overcome their challenges. Roll that forward to the live action version of it. She was bestowed with being the best in the world. She didn't need to do anything. And the only challenge that she needed to overcome were the men around her not believing in her sufficiently. It's patronizing. It's patronizing to women. If I was a woman and I was basically being fed, you are perfect as you are. You don't ever need to overcome anything, and any challenges that you face are exclusively because of the world out there being oppressive onto you. That's not inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree with that, really. And I think there's an important point here about self-improvement. I mean, the men's self-improvement space is very big, as we know, all right? I mean, you've got from people, you know, like me doing this stuff, to you've got the guys in the manosphere, you've got Fresh and Fit, and then you've got Chris Williamson, and then you've got Joe Rogan, you know, right up to the stratosphere of this stuff. There's a lot of people out there. I mean, Wes Watson is another dude I've been listening to recently. You've got Jocko Willink. There's a lot of guys. I mean, you arguably Tate, people have their issues with him, but I mean, it's the same kind of thing, isn't it? It's like, get up, go to the gym, lift weights, get to work, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. Like, men are very, very, very much encouraged now in the culture to get out there and grind and do it. And rightly so, because as we always say, the burden of performance is on men, okay? So men, in a way, don't really have a choice, because well, you do. You can not do any of that stuff, and you can sit in your bedroom and do fuck all. But the reality is you're going to get left behind in the dating marketplace, at least, and probably in the career marketplace and business and everything else, if you don't attend to these things. Like there's an expectation on men to self-improve. It doesn't seem that, and I don't consume a lot of media that's aimed at women, so this isn't definitive, but from what I've seen, it doesn't seem like there's the same amount of content that is pushed towards women, telling them to self-improve. And I just think from a human perspective, that's not a good thing, all right? Because I think that we should all be on a journey, whether you're a man, you're a woman, whatever, we should all be on a journey of self-improvement, because none of us is born perfect. Now, the problem, of course, you've got is that if a woman she's born, she gets to the age of 18, 19, 20, she's very good looking, she's naturally, you know, in good shape, etc. She doesn't really need to do a lot. Certainly not for the first few years, for the first like 10, until maybe she hits 30 or whatever. She doesn't need to do a lot, because genetically she's just in great shape anyway. And as we would always say, what that means is she's afforded these amazing opportunities that the average guy, and even beyond the average guy, even the Chad, for the most part, is not going to be afforded. Okay, like, she's going to get taken to the Oscar party. She's going to be on the yacht. She's going to be on this. She's going to be on that. You know, she's going to be invited by A-list celebrities to these different things. Okay, the average dude is just not going to get those opportunities. Okay, unless he's selling drugs, maybe, I don't know. But like, for the most part, the average dude, and even the above average dude, is not going to get that level of access. So women, not all women, but women who are blessed in those departments tend to get a lot handed to them on a silver platter very early on. And so the necessity for self-improvement for women is lower. And on top of that, because men are expected to step up to the plate and be the providers and be the guys who, you know, who go in there and sort it out and look after her and everything else, there's even less of an onus on self-development for women, which I think is just a bad thing for women. Because, as I say, I think all of us, while we're here, we should be aiming to become the best version of ourselves that we can. Now, that's not to say that no women do anything. Obviously, they do. There's a lot of women who are very into their fitness, into their health, into their gym, into their wellness, you know, holistic, meditation, women who are content creators. I mean, there are women who do amazing things. But I just don't feel that it is sort of pushed on them in the culture as much as it is on men. And I just can't see that being a good thing.